Ms. Renzella. Thank you for being here. You're obviously familiar with the Auditor General's report on Ornge.
Yes.
You've had a chance to read it.
I read the draft. I haven't read the new revised, but I would assume it's not substantially different.
When you first saw the Auditor General's report, what was your reaction?
I was shocked, dismayed, upset, disappointed, a number of, it was just not a very, I was just very upset about it.
It's a very scathing report.
Yes.
On a number of fronts, whether it has to do with the patient safety and patient care side or whether it has to do with the operational side.
Right.
It left a lot of questions, which of course is why we're here.
Yes.
One of the things that concerned us a great deal, and I think probably added to the concern not only of this committee and legislators, but the public as well, were the Auditor General's comments that it was very difficult for him to get information when he asked for it. And the minute that there's a cloak of secrecy, it obviously begs the question, what are these people hiding? Can you help us to understand why the Auditor General would have been obstructed to get information that clearly he felt was in his mandate to have available to him so that he could in turn report to the legislature on what was happening at Ornge?
As I read that, I felt that we responded to all the Auditor General requests as on a timely manner. In some places, we had to go look for the information due to filing and having it in boxes or pulling some things together to make it cohesive. If the Auditor General is referring to the issue about the restructuring and understanding there were some documents that were in or out of scope, there was a discussion between the chair of the board at the time and the director in the Auditor General's office to determine what the scope of the work was between that for-profit side and the not-for-profit side. My understanding at the time that there was agreement as to what was to be shared and what was not to be shared. There was no comment otherwise that would have indicated that we were not sharing information appropriately, and I did not hear that we were not sharing information. I do understand at times, though, it just took us a little longer to pull some information together.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to hear from the Auditor General. I understand, and my question to the Auditor General is, were there specific requests that you made to Ms. Rothfels on occasion, and what was the response from Ms. Rothfeld to your request?
I think the best way I can characterize it, well, thank you, Chair. I think maybe the best way I can characterize it is we eventually got the information that we requested, but it compared with our other audits, it took an unduly long, I guess, amount of time to get the information. You know, often we'd ask for it, we'd have to ask for it again, we'd get a document, we wouldn't get all the document. As Ms. Renzella knows, a lot of the documents were with the lawyers. That took a fair bit of time. So it was challenging to get the documents. We eventually got it. We eventually got the explanations, but it just took a lot of time.
Thank you. I think the concern that we have, Ms. Renzella, is that there seemed not only to be a great deal of complexity around this organization, there clearly were a lot of issues that did not invoke a great deal of confidence. We've already heard your responses to the issue of the Sunshine List.
Right.
You know, we also heard testimony from Ms. Golding about the fact that, yes, they provided legal opinion, but in providing that legal opinion, they also made a recommendation that, notwithstanding the fact that you are not obligated legally to disclose, they recommended that you do so anyway, given the relationship between Ornge and the Government of Ontario. Can you confirm that?
Yes.
Yes. And nevertheless, despite the fact that your legal firm, while responding to the technical request to provide a legal opinion, and they provided that but offered their best advice to say, look, in the interest of public confidence, you should be disclosing these salaries. You can understand, I'm sure, why we would question the motivation and the intent when this organization that was receiving $150 million of public money would choose not to. Does that make sense to you? Do you understand why we would be concerned?
I understand. I understand. As I had already said, this was a Dr. Mazza decision, so this is what he wanted to do.
Ms. Renzella, you have a professional background.
Yes.
Prior to coming to Ornge, you were with Allstream, respectable company. What was your role there?
I was a director of finance. I worked mainly with the sales and marketing departments.
Okay. And what was your income at Allstream?
It was $120,000 at the time, plus a number of options.
And when you came to Ornge, what was your starting salary there?
$130,000.
Okay, and within the next, I think the last salary that I saw posted was $430,000. Is that correct?
It was the salary was made up of a number of components.
Yes.
It was $240,000 plus there was a performance bonus on top.
Right. So, but basically, in the space of when did you start?
April 2005.
2005.
Yes, so I started at 130 plus a performance bonus at that point in time. As well, Allstream, there was performance bonus and options too.
So, you know, it's fair to say that you've done very well there. In fact, what we've seen from other executives, everyone did well at Ornge. And no one denies anyone success. But the reason that we're examining this is because it is tax dollars, and it wasn't exactly a perfect organization in terms of the success measurements that as a public body we would like to see from the standpoint of delivering emergency ambulance services. So you understand, again, our questioning, and I think the taxpayer wants us to get some answers to these questions. Can I ask this? As a professional who no doubt took your responsibilities very seriously, did you at any time while you were employed at Ornge feel that you were being asked to do certain things that you felt were the wrong things to do?
While I was at Ornge, I thought a lot about whatever I was asked to do. The mission, I stayed at Ornge mainly because of the mission that it had. It was performing a service to the province of Ontario, which was very important to me. I was very loyal to that and committed to that organization. When things were asked, I tried to ensure that it stayed in my mind within the realms of what would be appropriate. I ensured, first and foremost, whatever was done was legal, and I would go to the lawyers a number of times to make sure that whatever was being asked was legal. That was my first and foremost. And in many cases, and we were able to always work within a legal environment. Whether or not I agreed with every decision made, I would suggest that I could say to you, I didn't agree with every decision made. I would have made other decisions depending on if I was in that position to make the decision.
I'd like you to think about this very carefully.
Okay.
And I'd like you to think about the time when the aircraft purchase agreement was finalized, and the follow-up to that with the marketing services agreement. I understand that you were the point person, along with Dr. Mazza, in negotiating directly with Augusta the marketing services agreement. Is that correct?
Yes, with the marketing services agreement. I was not involved in the negotiations on the helicopter agreement, no.
That is contrary to what Mr. Potter said, and I'm sure you saw his
I saw that, and that was incorrect.
Why do you think Mr. Potter would have put you into that position?
I don't know. At the time when they were negotiating the agreement, I was not part of that. It's a very complex agreement. You're buying helicopters. So there were consultants on board that we had hired and contractors with aviation experience in aircraft procurement, and there were lawyers on board. I was not involved in the setup of that. You may have forgotten.
But you were involved in negotiating directly with Augusta the marketing services agreement. Is that correct?
Initially, and then as the services started to be defined, it actually moved over into the marketing area.
Okay, but at that beginning stage, can I ask, where did the original draft of that agreement emanate from? Is that something that you prepared, or was that initial draft delivered to you by Augusta as a starting point?
Okay, so if I can step back and sort of walk through what the agreement was. I received a phone call in January of, I believe it was 2010, and Dr. Mazza had called me and informed me that he had negotiated a deal with Augusta whereby he agreed to pay for weight upgrades, and in return he wanted to receive a donation, of which he wanted the donation to be used to help with these revenue generating opportunities. He therefore mandated me to when I returned back to get in contact with lawyers and move forward and determine on how to execute this. I returned from school at that point in time, and spent like the first week understanding the facts. I didn't understand completely what the deal was. Had to talk to a number of people. I spoke with the lawyers to understand, what they understood the deal was to be, and just had to think about what this all meant. Later on, it became apparent, the lawyers did come back to me and said that what Dr. Mazza wished to do could not be done, especially in regards to a charitable organization. You could not take funds like that, receive them, and to have them used for revenue generation activities.
How much money were we talking about?
We were talking $4.8 million.
$4.8 million. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
At this point in time, just to make it all clear, the organization Ornge owned both the foundation, not legally, but it had control over the foundation and the organization called Ornge Peel at the time. And so there was discussions with the lawyers whereby for such a transaction to occur, a value for the service being given had to be demonstrated. And therefore, we talked about it. I talked to Chris. I looked at, I was just trying to think through what that could mean. If you read the agreement, I read the agreement with Augusta. It had contemplated a joint marketing agreement at the time. I spoke with Chris and explained to him specifically what the lawyers had said, talked to him about the concept of this joint marketing. Maybe there's marketing service that could be provided or something, but it was more of a brainstorming to talk about service, value for service. Then I talked to the lawyers a bit more to understand whether that would be something that was legally qualifying. And Dr. Mazza, therefore, I think he thought about it a bit more and spoke with Augusta at that point in time.
Okay, that's interesting. And so it was intended, the $4.8 million was really a donation. Your lawyers told you that you can't accept that donation, and so we went back to the drawing board to say, how can we accept this $4.8 million, and how can we paper this? That's really what it came down to, isn't it?
How do you make it legal to be used for what you needed to use the funds for?
Or at least appear legal.
Well,
right?
at the time, the intention, I believe, was to make sure, right? But
in the process of this, because again, I remind you that we've had a number of people here under oath, and there'll be more to come. There were a lot of people concerned about this process, and there were a lot of people who saw through the facade of this paper. At any time, and please think about this, at any time did any of the consultants or executives around you or board members come to you to say, look, this is wrong, this is illegal, this is essentially fraud? Did that ever happen?
No. What people were, there was definitely controversy between Rick and Chris at the time as to whether Chris would pay for the weight upgrades, but no one ever used the word fraud. No one said it was illegal. It was never mentioned. I never heard of that term. So,
did anyone suggest it was questionable?
Like I said, there was a lot of internal controversy. I think the focus and the mandate I had at the time was definitely to try to ensure that it was, whatever we were doing was legal. That was the focus.
You are confirming that Mr. Potter, who took great pride in telling us that he had essentially, and whether it was him or whether it was a group of them, had essentially negotiated away the cost of that weight upgrade. And that Dr. Mazza insisted, nevertheless, to pay that. And the way we understand it is that even though Augusta had agreed not to charge it, Dr. Mazza insisted on paying it, and it was going to be paid clearly out of the bond offering funds that had been raised to buy the helicopters, and then that money would be funneled back into what was going to be the charity, but ended up being which company?
Ornge Peel.
Ornge Peel. So you are confirming that?
The actual discussions and the negotiations, I was not part of. I just received that phone call from Chris. Rick said he was unhappy with it. Again, I don't know all the details of what Rick negotiated at the time. I received the phone call from Chris at the time stating that.
Okay. Can you tell me when those payments ultimately, I'll just fast forward a bit
Sure.
here. When those payments were made, and we have a copy of the marketing services agreement, I think it's been circulated to everyone, there's a schedule of payments. When those payments were made, they were made to Ornge Peel, you say?
Yes.
Yes. And they would have come through your office as the finance person. You would have received those wire transfers, I'm assuming, and you would know where they were deposited. Is that correct?
My finance team would have known that.
Okay. Where were they deposited?
They would have been deposited in the Ornge Peel bank account at the time.
Okay.
And then when there was the corporate restructuring in 2011, January 2011, there was that movement. A new corporation of Ornge Global Corporate Services was set up, at which point in time that agreement was assigned there. Once it was assigned there, then those payments were made to that organization.
All right. So there would have been funds already deposited from the previous payments.
Right.
You're saying then that those funds were transferred into the Ornge Global Services account.
Yes. The funds, the way it would have worked at the time, and this is where things get a bit complex, is through the corporate restructuring. What we ensured during that time period, or the finance team, was ensuring that any funds received from the marketing service agreement was delineated from the rest of the Ornge's funds. There was to be no commingling of the funds, the government funds versus the Augusta funds. And those funds were used to pay off any activities that were not related to the provision of air ambulance services in Ontario. So there was that was how it was working.
Okay, so those just, I'm sorry.
Left, Mr. Klees.
Okay, well, we'll have to, could I take about 5 minutes of my time? I just want to finish this line of questioning,
go
if you don't
ahead.
mind. I'll make it
Is
up
that fine?
on the next round.
Go ahead,
So
continue.
what we have here, and it's very honorable that the folks wanted to make sure there's no commingling of funds, right?
Exactly.
They didn't want that money to go into the not-for-profit section.
And vice versa. You didn't want
Sure.
the non-for-profit section
Did
being...
anyone suggest that that's where they came from to begin with?
No.
No, of course not. Can you tell me, because they came from originally the bond offering, right?
The bond offering was used to pay for the upgrades.
Right.
And a number of other
And-
upgrades
right,
that were
and-
going on at the
right.
time.
But we negotiated down, so we didn't have to pay the 10 million. Now, the 4.8 net of the upgrades was funneled back into Ornge Global. And so it's all from the same source. And of course, the taxpayers are paying the interest payments on that money. So in the end, it's nice to keep it segregated, but it really was all public money to begin with. Nevertheless, we'll deal with that elsewhere. Can you tell me what happened? You said that those monies were then earmarked to use for other things. What other things and what other activities?
They were to be used for the provision of the services per the marketing agreement. So it was any of the hiring marketing personnel, sales personnel, and professional fees that were encountered in helping to develop some of the revenue.
So $4.8 million was used to pay people like Kelly Long, who I understand had the lead on that whole marketing production. We're going to be getting a copy of the deliverables under that marketing agreement. Mm-hmm. In your professional opinion, was that marketing agreement and the products that were ultimately delivered to Augusta, was that worth $4.8 million?
The two ways to answer that. First of all, it was negotiated with Augusta. There was a large amount of time negotiated. It was not something that was done overnight. I started with that negotiation in March. The agreement was signed about 4 or 5 months later, and it was to ensure that the services did provide $4.8 million. Now, when looking at it from our perspective and at the beginning, it was to understand what the cost would be in delivering such a service at that time. And there was obviously a profit component. But again, I would ask Augusta to ensure that whether they received that value.
Sure. Well, we know it was a donation. And we also know that the contract itself was nothing more than a sham. And Augusta participated in that. We have evidence that they do that worldwide. This is part of how they do business, from what we're told. And I guess what I was hoping to hear from you is that, and I'm hoping that someone, I mean, Mr. Potter came very close to it, I'm hoping that someone within Ornge will actually fess up and actually say, you know something, folks, this was wrong. We did the wrong thing. Everybody sees it. What we're looking for is for someone, now it may take the police to do that, I don't know. I'm sure they're following the money, and ultimately they will draw a conclusion. What I think the public is interested in, what we would like to see as a committee, is that someone who was engaged in this, whether they were bullied into doing it or whether they did it simply through complicity, it would be good to simply have an answer. And for someone to stand up and say, you know what, I'm willing to actually tell the truth here. I think this was wrong. And yet, I was bullied into participating into making this happen. Would you be willing to step forward to do that?
When I looked at the transaction at the time, and it was at the time when everything was within the same, it was all within the same group. It was the same organization. It was looking at making a payment, receiving a payment in order to generate revenues that was looking at ensuring the long-term sustainability of the organization. It was to help generate profits. It was going to help provide services to the province of Ontario. It would help mitigate any financial risk. There was a number of what potentially that was going to help do when it was pulled together underneath one roof. As the for-profit structure was created, and that was the one in 2011, and then that agreement was moved over to that side. You know, I can understand how, as you sit there, you're looking at this, and I can understand your position. So I would relook at that transaction, given the way it ended up being. But initially, it was all to be a beneficial transaction for all.
Thank you very much, Chair.
You have used your 5 minutes, additional 5 minutes. We'll move to the NDP. Ms. Jellens.
Thank you. You were at Ornge from April 2005 till 2012, that you invested